This is episode 516 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drengmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, we're doing things a little differently today because getting close to the Independence Day holiday and travel plans. So week after this one, we'll both be in separate locations from the usual. And you're up in the Wisconsin area, not the land of lakes, Minnesota, but a different lake in adjacent state.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's always a bit of culture shock and definitely humidity shock when you go to the Midwest or upper Midwest. But so far, it's been really nice and cool for this time of year.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of green. That's always one of the things you get anytime you travel outside New Mexico is you're like, holy cow, it's so green here. But
yeah, that we definitely have that. Lots of water, lots of green.
Yeah. So we'll get right into it though. There's still a lot going on here in New Mexico and political and politics related news. And the Santa Fe New Mexican recently ran an editorial. So this is their House editorial where they expressed support for a green bank for New Mexico. We have previously discussed on this show and in other formats the idea of a state bank along the lines of what North Dakota has in place. The green bank, as the New Mexican argues, is more for increasing investments, as it describes, in New Mexico communities rather than those funds being held by global banks making investments outside the state. A green bank would have environmental goals and would be ultimately designed to leverage federal dollars that flow into the state. So I think the term bank is more colloquial in this sense. The state bank of North Dakota has been introduced in legislation. I think the last time was 2022, the 30-day session. There remains a pretty active and dedicated group around the state bank. The green bank, that's a first to me, news to me kind of issue. And I think it's safe to say that we have pretty strong concerns about both of them, but it kind of fits with the line from the I forget the name of the bank robber, but why do you rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. Well, right now
I think Willie Sutton. So
Willie
we
Sutton.
have that. There we go. I mean, I've been seeing a lot of bank robberies lately and fiscal policy in this country.
Yeah, well, in New Mexico, of course, because we have so much money flowing in, the advocates, supporters of all kinds, all manner of new uses for those dollars are after it and trying to leverage those dollars for their own purposes as opposed to for the benefit of New Mexicans. And, Wally, we've seen over the years that our legislature, our governor have been all too willing to let those dollars flow to especially anything that possibly is outlined or painted green. So it wouldn't be a shock at all if this got some traction, but we'll see where things go in the 2024 session. Mostly, we're looking and waiting and watching and hoping that we don't have to deal with multiple New Mexico state bank proposals as we head into 2024.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Paul. You raised a good point. Is this really even a bank? What is a bank? A commercial bank is something that gets funds from investors, invests that in various assets until it's ready to lend it out, and it lends it out with the goal of one, getting a return on that in the form of interest, but two, getting paid back, period. And so a lot of these initiatives, I don't know, calling it a bank, that we'll wait and see if it is a bank, but it's like, does it get paid back? And, in no way to say that the private banking sector is in any way, shape, or form perfect, but the key is that we see a lot of cases where things don't get paid back. And so is this just another way? You might as well call it a grant if there's no expectation, or if the business model turns out to be we're just going to try things that nobody else would invest in.
Yeah, and for folks who might be interested in more details on this, at the Errors of Enchantment site, I made a post, but specifically episode 278 of Tipping Point, New Mexico, February 25th, 2021. I talked to Jerry Walker from the Independent Community Bankers Association of New Mexico about this particular idea. Needless to say, he is not a fan, nor would anybody who is running a traditional private sector bank. And yeah, there's a lot of issues with the banking sector and federal and state regulations, and let alone the Federal Reserve and all kinds of stuff that the Rio Grande Foundation does not discuss at length, because it's outside of our state policy wheelhouse here. But the idea that we need a government's created bank of either the green or the North Dakota variety seems hard to understand where that case is made. Strikes us as just another way to suck up some of those dollars that have flowed in from the oil and gas industry here in New Mexico. So next up on the agenda, of course, kind of the world, certainly America, was captivated last week with the ultimate sinking and tragic deaths of folks above in that submarine, and the Rio Grande Foundation. We were watching that as well. The connection, though, certainly was not lost on us here at the Rio Grande Foundation over the fact that we have our own pretty experimental technologies operating in this state. Now, Virgin Galactic seems much more of a legitimate operation than the sub that went down and was imploded in its attempt to visit the Titanic last week. But what ultimately happens in the wake of these tragedies, aside from sadness and second guessing, is often legal recourse. And we don't know even what the sub legal situation is going to look like, but we do know that the New Mexico legislature anticipated the legal issue with regard to Virgin Galactic and its manned space tourism flights. And we're going to have one potentially this week as the Italian Air Force does some experiments. And in the first official flight of commercial paying customers into near orbit. So that is supposed to happen, I believe, June 30th. So just a few days from now. But in 2021, the legislature placed $1 million cap on legal liability for Virgin Galactic. And I think the concern, as I see it, Wally, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is $1 million is a lot of money, but when you lose a loved one, and more importantly, when you lose a millionaire or billionaire, many of these people who are paying to fly with Virgin Galactic are of that very, very high dollar ilk. And heaven forbid, a Justin Bieber or Justin Timberlake or one of these big name performers went, on a flight that was unsuccessful, I don't know that the estates and the families are going to be satisfied with $1 million hit from Virgin Galactic. Lawyers have a funny way of being entrepreneurial when it comes to who they target and finding the deepest pockets that they can possibly go after. And I just have this concern, this suspicion that the deepest pockets in the room, so to speak, are the pockets of New Mexico taxpayers in the state of New Mexico. And, we hopefully will never have to deal with this. Hopefully every flight Virgin Galactic ever undertakes is a safe and successful one. But I have to, in the back of my mind, have those concerns. And it's obviously something the legislature considered as recently as 2021. And it just strikes me as there's potentially unforeseen liability issues with the state of New Mexico's involvement in Spaceport America.
Well, I think that's a good point about, entrepreneurial lawyers finding a way to do it and, challenging these waivers. The other thing is that I don't think that people are now flocking to line up to do small craft submarine deep sea excursions, let's put it that way. And then the same thing, one of the risks that Virgin Galactic has always faced is, let's say that $1 million cap does hold. It's one of those, depending on the nature of your accident, that still could be something that would be a business ending sort of proposition. If you have the film of a plane going, of their, spacecraft plane combo going down, what's that going to do to the business model, no matter who's on it? And as you say, if it's somebody famous, it'll be off the charts. I have a feeling that, anything happens bad, it's probably going to be a worldwide story anyway. So they've got that other business risk. And the point is to make that go for them, keeping their craft from crashing is a very important aspect of their business.
No doubt. And, we won't know until and if something happens, and we all hope and pray that it doesn't. But those attorneys, they are entrepreneurial in their own way, as we see, especially if you live around Albuquerque or see the media in the city, the billboards, et cetera. Those attorneys can be very aggressive, and they certainly don't leave money on the table if they can avoid it. Wally, happy anniversary. The anniversary is not to do directly with Tipping Point, New Mexico, but it is the 5th anniversary of the Janus decision. Janus versus ASME. Hard to believe that here we are 5 years since the U.S. Supreme Court handed down one of the more important decisions in recent memory that essentially made government employees right to work workers. They gave them the ability to opt out of being forced into a union, a government employee union. Now, New Mexico is not a right to work state, despite the Rio Grande Foundation's best efforts, despite Susana Martinez's best efforts when she was governor. The state of New Mexico allows unions in the private sector to continue to force people to pay union dues, whether they wish to be a member or not. But for government employees, the Supreme Court said, no, that is not proper role. You should not have these private organizations getting access essentially to the paychecks of government employees before they get their own money. And that's a very political setup there, and hinders free speech and a number of other free association kind of components of the US Constitution. So that anniversary alone is worth recognizing, but what's even more interesting is the Mackinac Center, our sister think tank based in Michigan. They did a report recently looking at the decline in union membership in various states like New Mexico that were not already right to work, so that shifted under the Janus decision from government unions being, union membership being required to having the right to work. And, Wally, we often talk about New Mexico being number one on the bad list and being at the bottom of the good list. Well, here's a case where I would argue that we're at the top of one of the good lists. We saw a nearly 62% decline in government employee union membership in the wake of the Janus decision. The only state that even approached us was actually Colorado at just over 50%. Most other states that were not already right to work, say in New York, 17.2% drop, Washington State, 26.2%, Illinois, 12.4%, which is actually where Mark Janus is from. So New Mexico saw a massive decline in government employee union membership, and the Rio Grande Foundation was quite frankly part of the effort to educate those workers and reach out and Facebook and other forms of media and make sure that those union employees knew their rights under the new Janus decision. And apparently, Wally, our efforts were rather successful, and New Mexico really blew everybody else out of the water in terms of people deciding, I am happy with my government job, but I don't want to be a part of that union.
Yeah, it is fascinating, Paul, that we led the pack on that. And it's one of those things. As I look through the states and the various numbers, I don't know. I just get a sense of a couple of things. One, New Mexico has not had, other than government, a lot of union jobs in our state. We're not a real big union state, period. And so there's not that kind of broader based private sector union culture that has happened. And you look at places like New York and New Jersey, which has had a very union culture in the private sector for a long time. They didn't have as big of decreases. And then the other thing is that a lot of, if are the employees, do they really feel like their unions giving them value with regard to their state job? And there was a number of politicians that argued against allowing unionization of government workers as being redundant, and it was not some wild-eyed conservative that did that. And so this is just really, really fascinating. And I guess Colorado's really high in terms of the number percentage going down as well. And I think they kind of have a similar maybe history of not having a lot of broad-based union jobs, and their government employees obviously aren't seeing the value for just putting that extra money in their union representatives' pocket. Are they really getting value? And frankly, it has a lot more to do, I think, with the legislature in terms of how that goes. Is it just I don't know, almost a needless tax? And a lot of voters in New Mexico and Colorado and other places, they'd voted yes with their actions. We think it's not of value.
Yeah. It's hard to get to the why this number shifted so dramatically here in New Mexico. Certainly the large government presence and the limited opportunities in the rest of New Mexico's economy may be a factor. So you have a higher number of people who maybe are working for the government here in New Mexico because that's really the only option they have. And when presented with that opportunity to take home more of their pay, they said, sure, heck yeah, we'll do that. So I don't know. It's worth further investigation, but I thought that particular report and that information was fascinating. A tweet this week. Yes, tweets can be newsworthy in and of themselves. and you'll see why on this one. A tweet by the New Mexico legislature, which does have their own Twitter, just the whole legislature, at NM Legislature. So you can find them. They're not super active, but the LFC reported this week that the state of New Mexico's 5 investment funds or permanent funds grew more than $5 billion over the past 12 months to a total of $70.84 billion, billion with a B. That is a boatload of cash by any stretch of the imagination. And it just highlights that New Mexico is not a poor state. New Mexico is a very wealthy state with a lot of resources. But, you know, one of the critiques that we kind of share with our friends on the left is that New Mexico should not be nearly as poor as it is, but the money is often set aside and kept in abeyance for future usage, whatever those may be. And the question is, of course, whether we should spend that money right away or, in our view, reduce tax burdens and make New Mexico a more economically friendly place right away. Of course, we know what the left would do, but $70.84 billion sitting around in various accounts, just insane.
Yeah, and Paul, is New Mexico a poor state, or is the state government, you know, very rich and the people very poor? So, you know, that's kind of something that I think that is something that's worth talking about, because we have certainly a lot of money in Santa Fe, but do we have a lot of money elsewhere where it's in the pockets of people, you know, using it for what they need, or is it just sitting in the Santa Fe doing nothing?
I think that is a very important point and well taken. We definitely have a government that is, you know, grown fast in recent years, thanks to the oil and gas revenue, thanks to the policies of Michelle Lujan Grisham and the legislature. It was a government, quite frankly, that was bloated long before, even, you know, and we would constantly have those arguments, maybe more so 8 to 10 years ago, but you know, even during the Johnson administration, this government was bloated. You know, New Mexico's just not. It didn't just magically happen overnight that New Mexico government was too big and very wasteful and, quite frankly, incompetent. And, you know, Gary Johnson, of course, one guy as governor dealing with a legislature that's been entrenched for, at this point now, over 90 years. So, yeah, it's the idea that New Mexico government is anything but well-funded and very, very large is pretty silly on its face. But it's this kind of information released directly from the legislature, showing the kind of money that we're sitting on is pretty telling. And Wally, I know you'll get a kick out of this, but one of the commenters on Twitter said, well, you know, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund went on and bought the PGA Tour. So maybe New Mexico, rather than letting these dollars just sit around, should, you know, get involved with the PGA Tour or something like that. Definitely in jest, but I guess you could do a lot worse things with the money than bring a bunch of PGA golf tournaments to the state of New Mexico, and we could have the New Mexico PGA tournament, just a bunch of high-level golf, you know, golf tournaments coming to the state of New Mexico. It's you know, it's on par with the film industry, so we might as well get our cut at some point with the money floating around the state.
Yeah, if we're entertaining ideas, Paul, I think we ought to entertain starting an IndyCar team, or maybe even a Formula One team, because that's a good way to spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year to get your name on a car that can help your brand, whether it be something like Red Bull or in this case, the New Mexico IndyCar team.
There you go. A lot of action at Albuquerque City Council and here locally in the last week. City Council embraced casitas, rejected the weak mayor form of government, and rejected the duplex concept. We talked about this. None of this was kind of front and center for us at the Rio Grande Foundation. You and I discussed at one point, and we basically agreed that we felt much better about the casita concept, where a house is kind of built adjacent, presumably in the backyard of a house with the property, space to do that kind of thing. Duplexes were a lot less attractive, splitting up existing housing and putting more and more people into it. Really something that we didn't see very favorably. And then the weak mayor system, is that really the fundamental problem facing Albuquerque city government? We have a weak mayor currently. Going to a formerly weak mayor system, maybe not necessarily the solution for Albuquerque's problems. Certainly looking to Santa Fe, the legislature and the state's fundamental policies would be much more to blame in our estimation. But some big things happening at City Council, and I'm going to go out on a limb here in Wally and say, I think they largely got it right. I think these are, I would have liked to see the debate over weak versus strong mayor, but I don't think this was the solution. And I think on the casitas, they actually got things right as well.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I've often said that, why would you have that casita rule? There were certainly some strong critics, among them Pete Dinelli, who was very vocal in opposing any of those proposals. But the other one that I do think that maybe came out on the short end of the stick relative to what the policy was with the city of Albuquerque was the homeowners association and the neighborhood association, some of which were very vocally opposed, and the answer to them is tough. You've got to do this. So we'll be very interesting to see what happens. I know in places like Southern California, it's a lot easier to have auxiliary dwelling units than it is in Albuquerque. And so we'll see what the impact will be going forward. I'm sure there will be fits and starts. We're going to no doubt see some horror stories, but I have a feeling that when we look back here in 10 years, probably be a net positive for the city of Albuquerque.
Yeah, and we haven't talked a great deal about the politics of this one, and I would say that specifically on the land use and zoning concept, a lot of mixing and matching of political interests. The mayor, of course, being of the progressive ilk. Dinelli ran for mayor as a progressive back in the RJ Berry days, definitely also sees himself as a progressive, but also a critic of the current mayor. The development community behind the mayor, more or less. Some of the other more moderate to conservative councilors not excited about that. It was a complicated issue and something that land use and zoning and permitting and all those things are significant issues. I don't really think this is the solution or a realistic solution for our serious homelessness challenges. People putting casitas in their backyards or renting them out are not really going to be renting to those marginal folks, those homeless or recently homeless folks. It's just not in the cards. So you might see a little boost in overall housing supply, but I don't necessarily see this as a huge solution to the housing shortage as it is. But on the flip side, we know that this is an aging state, an aging community, an aging country, and those casitas are one potential solution for a lot of families. As you know, they're also known as mother-in-law suites. Well, aging mother-in-laws and those kinds of folks can definitely benefit from this as a housing option. So in that sense, I do think it has a bit of a positive impact there. So we'll see how it shakes out. But kind of center-right city council, progressive mayor, and I think they got to a good place here. So rarely that we get to say those kinds of things, Wally, on this show.
No, it's very good that happened in that way, and it's hard to, and because there was a lot of, again, the politics is not the typical sides that are chosen up on so many other issues. I think it was considered much differently than most issues here in Albuquerque.
Yeah, and I in the category of Rio Grande Foundation getting results, another local issue, and I just mentioned about the large number of New Mexico union workers opting out of being members of the public employees unions. And we can, like I said, take some credit for that because we did have significant resources expended in the wake of the Janus decision to educate those union members. Not something we really talked about a great deal, but definitely something that we were engaged in. Also in the area of results, we had noticed and complained and talked about with members of the APS school board that they had fallen off the bandwagon over at APS in terms of posting their payroll, posting their budgets, I should say, which include payroll, of course. But here we have fiscal year 2024 at hand, and they had not only not posted FY 2024, but we were nearly done with fiscal year 2023, and neither of them had been posted. We were complaining and asking and highlighting this over here at Heirs of Enchantment, and we're pleased to announce that both of those budgets have been been posted, I should say, over at the APS website. We provided a link, screenshot, and relevant information at Heirs of Enchantment. So some good news there in the area of government transparency. And now you too can see for yourself just how much APS is spending on a per student basis.
Yeah, well, that was a much needed thing. They needed to put that out there. I'm glad they did. And unlike what they do sometimes to say, "Oh, we're so big and we can't do it, and we need a grant or whatever," they didn't use excuses. They put it up there. So I won't give them kudos because it was a little bit late in the process, but at least they got it going.
Yeah, it's kind of the basics when it comes to government, but we're not going to sing their praises from the heavens. APS has done a good job over the years in publishing this information. I think, I don't know if they were reacting to our calling into question the way they spent, the amount of money that they had been budgeting and spending in recent years, or if something just kind of fell apart at the district. But we are pleased that they have posted both of those budgets, and I encourage folks to go online and look at them and see for themselves where the money is going, see how the student population is dropping, and all the other issues at Albuquerque Public Schools, which $2.16 billion. It's by no means a trivial amount of money there at APS. And finally, Wally, the Lujan Grisham administration, New Mexico joined a few other very left-wing blue states in encouraging the EPA, the US EPA, the Biden administration to follow the path of California and adopt something along the lines of California's advanced clean trucks regulation. The idea is that this letter, and again, you can find it at airsofenchantment.com, is that these states say that they would like something at least as restrictive as California's law, or even more so. And this California law, we've talked about the electric vehicle mandates and the state of New Mexico following California's lead on traditional, automobiles. Now we are moving into the realm of pickup trucks and vans, rigid, i.e. non-tractor trailer trucks. This is directly from a chart highlighting what California plans for these electric trucks. And then finally, tractor trailer trucks. So California has this on the books. So next year, 5% of tractor trailers and 5% of the rigid non-tractor trailer trucks, I assume these are the larger delivery vehicles, and 9%, actually 9% of the rigid trucks, and then 5% of the pickups and vans are going to be electric that are sold in California. Now, as long as this is one individual state, you have folks that will go wherever they need to go to purchase the vehicle that they need. If Lujan Grisham and this handful of states gets their way, and this becomes an EPA mandate, well, that brings a whole different level to the situation, and you really don't have many options. So just another indicator of Lujan Grisham and New Mexico following the leadership of California and trying to make our way of life, the goods shipped around our country, and everything just more expensive and less convenient, because charging stations for trucks, the amount of cost of these trucks, it strikes me as all being much more expensive and inferior relative to what we have in place currently.
Well, I call this aspirational rulemaking or whatever, and it's like there's no question that they want this to happen. They put these mandates in place, and with these extremely aggressive goals, but without any way to necessarily figure out how to get there. But in this case, more so than most, there are a lot of issues. You named a few of them. Now at the lower levels, 5% on some of these, like say rigid trucks, a lot of those don't go, they don't go out of the region. They operate in whatever region they're in, whether that be in the greater Albuquerque region, or even, there's a lot of rigid trucks in places like Santa Fe, Roswell, Las Cruces. They really never leave the region. They kind of deliver around. We'll have to see how this plays out, particularly on the over the road, the long haul trucks. We could see a lot of disruption of even supply chain and where people go, because there's not even necessarily great beta test examples out there for a lot of these things. I know there's some science fair experiments out there that exist, but the regulations and the aspirations of these policies seem like they're way ahead of where the technology, much less the supply chain and the manufacturing capability and what it would mean to our country would happen. And so won't be the first time, and California has done a lot of crazy things over the years. A lot of them did not work, and they had to back away from them, particularly with regard to their electric industry as being a good example. And we'll have to see, they were successful in a similar approach to the California emission standards, basically spread through the whole US. But again, that was on adding something to a technology that was already out there. A lot of supply chains existed, and we'll see what happens on this. Comes to mind is Herbert Stein, if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. And so we'll see how far we make it on this until the real problems start to emerge.
Yeah, the other states that signed it. So California, of course, this is applying California's regulations across the country using the EPA. So California, Colorado, Maine, Maryland, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, and Washington. Some of the very bluest of the blue states, no surprise there. But these are the kinds of places that have the ear of the Biden administration, certainly on energy issues. We, of course, know that our senior Senator Martin Heinrich is very passionate in advocating for electrification. This would be right up his alley, and Heinrich certainly has the ear, it seems, of the Biden administration. Now, I mentioned that next year, 5% pickups, trucks, and vans, 5% tractor trailers, and then 9% non-tractor trucks, rigid trucks. But that ramps up very quickly. And by 2035, California's mandate is for 75% of the rigid non-tractor trucks, 55% of pickups and vans, and 40% of tractor trailers. So you might be able to skate by at the state level with regard to these policies, but certainly at the EPA level, and if this was to be applied nationwide, I don't think we have the charging stations. I don't think you can charge a tractor trailer at the same charging station as a Tesla. I may be incorrect in that. I've never seen a tractor trailer that looked like an electric vehicle. So there's that. You got to have a few of these on the road. I don't know how many New Mexicans, and pickup trucks, of course, are very, very popular vehicles in this state. Whether you haul anything or not, I can't imagine some of the guys out there driving their dualies and big pickup trucks will be super excited to buy electric versions of them. So there's a boatload of issues here. Yes, I agree, aspirational, but this Biden administration in particular has often been willing to jump on board with those kinds of policies and then backtrack quietly later, as we saw with the ban on drilling. So we'll be watching this and checking it out. It's certainly, I can say, generated a great deal of attention on Heirs of Enchantment. We've had several comments already from readers saying this is outrageous, this is ridiculous. So maybe it's not the guns, maybe it's the big 7.4 liter pickup trucks that out of my cold dead hands, people will not give those up. We'll see.
Well, speaking as a person who has one of those, hopefully they won't come for that. Hopefully they'll just come for the future ones. So
there you go. You're grandfathered in, Wally. You're grandfathered in. But all right, well, we're going to leave it there. Have a great Independence Day week, really, everybody. We will have shows released next week, probably just not on Independence Day. Just stay tuned and check back for details. Watch your podcast feed. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing the show.